The hum of the jet engines blended with the muffled chatter of passengers as Alex Carter stepped onto the plane. It was a commercial flight, but for Alex, it felt like a bridge between two very different worlds. Just hours ago, he had been in his military fatigues, wrapping up his final debriefing after a year-long deployment in the Middle East. Now, dressed in a casual sweater and jeans, he looked like any other traveler boarding a plane. But his heart was heavy with the experiences he carried. Alex glanced at his boarding pass, Seat 2A, first class. He had booked it using frequent flyer miles and a small discount offered to military personnel. It wasn't luxury he sought. It was a brief respite from the constant grind, a chance to close his eyes and, for once, let his guard down. As he made his way to his seat, he thought about Rachel, his wife, and their two kids, Noah and Emily. They were waiting for him in Seattle, counting down the hours until he walked through the front door. The thought of his children's laughter and Rachel's warm embrace filled him with a bittersweet ache. He'd missed their birthdays, school plays, and countless moments he could never get back. But now, finally, he was going home. The first-class cabin was calm and orderly, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos of the coach section. Alex slid into his window seat, grateful for the small luxury. He tucked his bag into the overhead compartment and settled in, taking a deep breath. This was his moment to relax, if only for a few hours. A few minutes later, the sharp click of heels on the aisle floor caught Alex's attention. A tall, elegant woman in a crisp navy suit strode into the cabin. Her platinum blonde hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her heels clacked with purpose as she walked. She radiated confidence, but there was something in her expression, a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, that hinted at arrogance. She stopped at Alex's row and glanced at the seat numbers. Her brow furrowed, and her painted red lips tightened into a frown. "Excuse me," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I believe you're in my seat." Alex looked up from his phone, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. He glanced at his boarding pass again, then pointed to the seat number above. "This is 2A," he said politely. "I'm pretty sure this is my seat." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned closer, scrutinizing him as if trying to find something amiss. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone sharp and tinged with disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied evenly. He gestured to the ticket on his phone. "2A, that's me." For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes swept over him, lingering on his worn sneakers and the simple sweater he wore. "I see," she said finally, her tone clipped. "I just didn't expect," she trailed off, her words hanging in the air like a bad afterthought. "Didn't expect what?" Alex asked, his tone still calm but now carrying a slight edge. She straightened, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. "It's just unusual," she said with a forced smile. "I don't usually see people like you in first class." Alex blinked, taken aback. "People like me?" "You know," she said, waving a manicured hand vaguely. "Military types? I thought they usually fly economy." The comment landed like a slap. Alex felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to stay composed. "I've earned my place here, ma'am," he said firmly. "It's part of my benefits as a service member." Her smile faltered, but only briefly. She rolled her eyes in a way that made it clear she wasn't impressed. "Well, I suppose we all have our perks," she said dismissively. The flight attendant, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Is everything okay here?" she asked with a practiced smile. "Everything's fine," Alex said quickly, hoping to diffuse the situation. The woman glanced between Alex and the attendant, then sighed dramatically. "I'll find another seat," she said, her tone suggesting she was doing them both a favor. She turned on her heel and clacked away, her heels echoing down the aisle. Alex exhaled slowly, his body tense. He had faced worse situations during his deployment, moments of real danger that tested every ounce of his resolve. But this was different. It wasn't about physical threats. It was about the quiet, insidious sting of being judged, dismissed, and looked down upon. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes and trying to shake off the encounter. He reminded himself that he was almost home, that this was just a blip in the grand scheme of things. The plane filled quickly, and soon the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Alex barely registered the words, his thoughts drifting to the life waiting for him in Seattle. He pictured Noah's excited chatter about his soccer games, Emily's giggles as she showed him her latest drawings, and Rachel's smile, a beacon of warmth and stability. As the plane lifted off the ground, Alex stared out the window at the shrinking city below. He wanted to leave the confrontation behind, to focus on the good things ahead. But the woman's words lingered in his mind like an unwelcome guest. People like you. The phrase echoed, carrying with it all the assumptions and prejudices he had encountered over the years. It wasn't the first time he'd been reduced to a stereotype, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But Alex had learned long ago how to navigate these moments. He would rise above it, just as he always had. As the plane soared into the clouds, Alex resolved to put the encounter behind him. He didn't know then that it was only the beginning of a storm that would test him in ways he hadn't imagined. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows of Alex Carter's modest suburban home in Seattle. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and the soft sounds of Rachel humming in the kitchen added a sense of normalcy to the morning. Alex sat at the dining table with Noah and Emily, watching as his kids worked on a colorful Lego tower. Their laughter was contagious, and for a moment, he let himself believe he had left all the tension of his deployment and the flight behind. "You're making that tower too tall," Alex teased as Emily stacked another Lego on top. "It's going to fall over." "No, it won't," Emily said with a giggle, her small hands carefully pressing the piece into place. Alex chuckled and leaned back in his chair, soaking in the moment. This was what he had missed most. These small, precious slices of life that reminded him why he endured so much. Just as Rachel walked in with a plate of scrambled eggs, the sound of Alex's phone vibrating on the kitchen counter broke the tranquility. "Who's calling so early?" Rachel asked, glancing at the clock. It wasn't even 8 a.m. Alex shrugged and got up to check. The caller ID read Captain Harris, his commanding officer. Alex's brow furrowed as a sense of unease crept in. Harris rarely called unless it was something important. "Give me a sec," Alex said, picking up the phone and heading into the hallway. "Morning, Captain," Alex said, keeping his tone light. "What's going on?" Harris's voice was calm, but carried a seriousness that immediately put Alex on edge. "Morning, Carter. I hate to bother you on your leave, but something's come up. We received a complaint about you." Alex froze. "A complaint?" "It's from a civilian," Harris explained. "Victoria Blake. She claims there was an incident during your flight yesterday. She's alleging verbal threats and inappropriate behavior." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "Wait, what? She's saying I threatened her?" "That's what the complaint states," Harris said. "The airline forwarded her statement to us because of your military affiliation. They have to take these things seriously." Alex leaned against the wall, his mind racing. "Captain, I didn't do anything. She was the one who made the situation tense, not me. I stayed calm the entire time." "I believe you, Carter," Harris said. "But this is protocol. You know how it is. There will be an investigation. Just tell the truth when you're contacted, and we'll handle it." The call ended, leaving Alex standing in the hallway, his chest tight with frustration. He replayed the flight in his mind, searching for anything that could have been misconstrued. He had been polite, patient, even when Victoria had made that snide comment about people like him. Rachel appeared in the doorway, concern etched across her face. "What's wrong?" Alex sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "That woman from the flight. She filed a complaint against me. She's claiming I threatened her." Rachel's eyes widened. "Are you serious? But you didn't." "I know," Alex interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. He took a breath, trying to calm down. "I know I didn't, but she's saying I did." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "This is ridiculous. She's just trying to stir up trouble. They'll see through it." "I hope so," Alex said, though doubt lingered in his mind. Later that afternoon, Alex received a call from an FBI agent, a man named Agent Miller. He introduced himself politely but got straight to the point. "We're conducting a preliminary investigation into a complaint filed by Ms. Victoria Blake regarding your behavior during the flight," Miller said. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Alex agreed and found himself recounting the encounter in detail. He explained how Victoria had claimed he was in her seat, her snide remarks, and her decision to move to another seat. At any point, Miller asked, "Did you raise your voice, use threatening language, or make any racially charged comments?" "No," Alex said firmly. "I stayed calm the entire time. There were other passengers and a flight attendant nearby. They can back me up." "We'll be speaking to them as well," Miller replied. "Do you recall if anyone recorded the interaction?" Alex hesitated, thinking back. "I didn't notice anyone recording, but it's possible." Miller thanked him for his time and ended the call, but the weight of the situation didn't lift. Instead, it pressed down harder. Over the next few days, the situation began to snowball. Victoria's version of events painted Alex as an aggressive, hostile passenger who had made her feel unsafe. The airline cooperated fully with the investigation, providing records and contacting witnesses. A week later, Alex's lawyer, Eric Langston, came to his house to discuss the case. Langston was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for defending veterans. "She's claiming you verbally assaulted her and made racial slurs," Langston said, flipping through a file. Alex felt his stomach churn. "That's a flat-out lie." "I believe you," Langston said, "but we need more than your word. I've spoken to a few passengers who were in first class. Most of them say they didn't hear anything unusual, but none of them are willing to go on record yet. They don't want to get involved." "What about the flight attendants?" Rachel asked, sitting beside Alex. "One of them is willing to confirm that Alex stayed calm," Langston said, "but the other is being cautious. She says she didn't see the entire interaction, so she can't make a definitive statement." "What about video footage?" Alex asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "There's a partial recording from a passenger's phone," Langston said. "It shows you sitting in your seat, looking calm, but it doesn't capture the entire exchange. It's helpful, but it's not definitive proof." Alex felt a surge of frustration. "So, her word against mine?" "For now," Langston said, "but don't lose hope. We're building a case. The truth will come out." That evening, Alex sat alone in the living room, staring at a photo of his family on the mantel. The weight of the complaint hung over him like a dark cloud, threatening to overshadow the life he had fought so hard to build. Rachel joined him, sitting quietly by his side. "We'll get through this," she said softly. Alex nodded but didn't speak. For the first time in years, he felt truly powerless. This wasn't the battlefield, where he knew his enemy and could rely on his training. This was something else entirely, a fight against prejudice, assumptions, and lies. And it was only just beginning. The steady drizzle of a Seattle morning cast a gray haze over the city. Alex sat at the dining table, sipping his coffee in silence. His lawyer, Eric Langston, had called the night before to confirm that the FBI wanted a formal interview. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was becoming a battle for his reputation, his career, and his peace of mind. Rachel entered the kitchen, balancing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. She set it in front of Alex and sat down across from him. "You barely slept," she said softly, studying his tired face. Alex forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hard to sleep when you've got this hanging over your head." "You're doing everything right," Rachel said, her voice steady. "You've told the truth. That has to count for something." "It should," Alex said, stirring his coffee absently. "But it feels like her word is being taken more seriously than mine. I've spent years serving this country, and now I'm being treated like a criminal." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We'll get through this. You've got me, the kids, and a lawyer who won't back down. We're in this together." The sound of small footsteps interrupted the moment. Noah and Emily came running into the kitchen, their laughter filling the space. For a brief moment, Alex felt a flicker of peace. He leaned down to hug them both, grateful for their innocence in the midst of his storm. Later that day, Alex arrived at the FBI office for his interview. The building was imposing, its clean lines and tinted windows reflecting the overcast sky. He adjusted his jacket, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Agent Miller greeted him in the lobby, his demeanor professional but not unkind. "Sergeant Carter, thank you for coming in," he said, shaking Alex's hand. Let's get this over with, Alex replied, his tone neutral. Miller led him into a small, windowless room with a table and 2 chairs. A second agent, a woman named Agent Green, joined them, setting a recorder on the table. Sergeant Carter, Miller began, we appreciate your cooperation. This is a formal interview regarding the complaint filed by Victoria Blake. We want to hear your side of the story. Alex nodded. Ask me anything. I have nothing to hide. For the next hour, Alex recounted every detail of the flight. He described how Victoria had approached him, her initial claim about the seat, and the veiled insult she had made about people like him. He emphasized that he had remained calm throughout the interaction, even when she had moved to another seat. Did you at any point raise your voice or make threatening statements? Agent Green asked, her eyes fixed on him. No, Alex said firmly. I've dealt with worse situations in my life. I wasn't about to let her get under my skin. And what about racial slurs? Miller added. Did you use any language that could be interpreted that way? Absolutely not, Alex said, his tone sharp. I would never say anything like that. The agents exchanged a glance before Miller leaned forward. Ms. Blake claims you said, and I quote, people like you don't belong here, in a hostile tone. Can you explain that? Alex clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I never said that. She was the one making those kinds of comments. She implied I didn't belong in first class because I'm a soldier. Agent Green nodded, jotting down notes. We're reviewing statements from passengers and flight attendants, as well as any video evidence we can find. If there's anything else you recall, now's the time to mention it. Alex shook his head. I've told you everything. I just want the truth to come out. Over the next week, Alex's life became a whirlwind of interviews, legal consultations, and mounting stress. The FBI continued to question passengers and staff from the flight. Some supported Alex's account, but others were reluctant to get involved. Eric Langston kept Alex updated on the investigation. The flight attendants are backing you, Eric said during a meeting at his office. One of them said you were calm the entire time. That's a big win. What about the passengers? Alex asked. Mixed results, Eric admitted. A few say they didn't notice anything unusual, but others claim they weren't paying attention. We've got one who said Ms. Blake seemed upset, but they didn't hear the full conversation. Alex leaned back in his chair, his frustration growing. So, her word still carries weight? For now, Eric said. But we're not done. There's one piece of evidence we're chasing, a passenger who recorded part of the interaction. If we can get the full video, it might clear everything up. Meanwhile, Alex began to feel the ripple effects of the investigation in his daily life. News of the complaint had spread among his neighbors and acquaintances. Some offered words of support, but others kept their distance, their silence speaking volumes. During a trip to the grocery store, Alex overheard 2 people whispering nearby. That's him, one said. The soldier from the flight. Really? I heard it was pretty bad, the other replied. Alex clenched his fists but kept walking, his head held high. He had faced more hostile environments during his deployment, but this felt different, like he was being judged in his own community. At home, Rachel noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as they sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, she placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't let this eat away at you, she said gently. Alex sighed, staring at the blank TV screen. It's hard not to. I've spent my life trying to do the right thing, and now I'm being treated like a criminal because of her lies. Rachel leaned closer, her voice firm. You're not a criminal. You're a good man, Alex, and anyone who knows you can see that. This will pass. I hope you're right, Alex said, his voice heavy. A week later, a breakthrough came. Eric called Alex with a note of excitement in his voice. We've got the full video, Eric said. It's from a passenger who finally came forward. The footage shows you sitting calmly while Victoria moves to another seat. No threats, no raised voice. It's exactly what we needed. Relief flooded Alex's chest. That's it then. They can't keep dragging this out. Eric was cautious. It's a strong piece of evidence, but we're not out of the woods yet. The FBI still needs to conclude their investigation, and we can't control how long that takes. But this is a big step forward. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't out of the storm yet, but the path to clearing his name was finally coming into view. The late autumn rain drizzled against the windows of Alex's living room as he sat with Eric Langston, who had arrived with new developments in the case. Rachel had brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the aroma filling the air, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut through the warmth. "I've uncovered something interesting about Victoria Blake," Eric began, flipping through a folder filled with documents. "It turns out this isn't her first time filing a complaint like this." Alex leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Eric slid a sheet of paper across the table. "Blake has a history of lodging false accusations against people, especially those she perceives as beneath her. There are at least 3 documented cases where she accused service workers, co-workers, and even a neighbor of misconduct. All of them were investigated, but none of her claims held up." Rachel picked up the paper, scanning it with growing incredulity. She accused a restaurant server of assault because they brought her the wrong order? This is ridiculous. "It's more than ridiculous," Eric said, his voice steady but firm. "It's a pattern. She uses these complaints to manipulate situations and, in some cases, to gain financial settlements. She's been doing this for years." Alex clenched his jaw, anger simmering just below the surface. "So, she's a professional liar. And now she's coming after me." "Exactly," Eric said. "And this gives us leverage. If we can establish her history of making false claims, it will significantly weaken her credibility in the eyes of the investigators." Rachel set the paper down and looked at Alex, her voice filled with quiet determination. "This is good news, Alex. It shows that she's the one with the problem, not you." Alex nodded, though the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. "I appreciate the work, Eric. But why hasn't this stopped her before? Why is she still able to pull this?" Eric sighed, his expression turning grim. "Because people like her thrive on intimidation and the system's tendency to take complaints at face value. Most of her past targets either didn't have the resources to fight back or were too afraid of the consequences to challenge her." "Well, I'm not backing down," Alex said, his voice firm. The days that followed were a mix of progress and frustration. The FBI continued their investigation, and while the newly uncovered information about Victoria Blake's history added to Alex's defense, it didn't immediately resolve the case. Meanwhile, the media had picked up the story. Local news outlets ran vague headlines about a decorated veteran under investigation following an in-flight altercation. Though Alex's name wasn't explicitly mentioned, the description was enough for people in his community to connect the dots. Alex tried to shield his family from the whispers and stares, but it was impossible to ignore. One evening, as he was picking Noah up from soccer practice, another parent approached him in the parking lot. "Hey, Alex," the man said, his tone friendly but cautious. "I just wanted to say, I heard about what's going on. It's crazy how people can twist things, huh?" Alex forced a polite smile. "Yeah, it's been a mess, but I'm handling it." The man nodded, hesitating before adding, "Well, if you need anything, just let me know. And for what it's worth, a lot of people around here respect what you've done for this country." Alex thanked him, but as he drove home, the encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. Even the well-meaning words felt like a reminder of the shadow hanging over him. A week later, Eric called with more news. "We've got a witness willing to testify," he said. "It's a passenger from your flight who initially didn't want to get involved, but after seeing the media coverage, they decided to speak up." "Who is it?" Alex asked. "Her name's Linda Avery," Eric replied. "She was seated a few rows behind you. She didn't hear everything, but she saw the way Victoria acted. She said it was clear Victoria was the one causing the commotion, not you." Alex felt a small glimmer of hope. "That's good, right?" "It is," Eric said, "but it's still not a slam dunk. We need to keep building the case. I've also reached out to a few people Victoria has targeted in the past. One of them, a former coworker, might be willing to share their story." Meanwhile, the online world was buzzing with divided opinions. A small grassroots movement had started in Alex's defense, spearheaded by fellow veterans and supporters of military families. Hashtags like #JusticeForCarter and #StandWithAlex began trending, with people sharing stories about his service and character. Rachel, who had been monitoring social media cautiously, showed Alex one such post one evening. It was written by a woman whose husband had served with Alex during a particularly grueling deployment. "Sergeant Alex Carter saved my husband's life during their time overseas," the post read. "He's the kind of person who puts others first, always. The idea that he would behave the way this woman claims is absurd. Let's stand up for him." The post had thousands of likes and comments, with people sharing their support for Alex. "It's good to see this," Rachel said, sitting beside him on the couch. "People believe in you." Alex nodded, though a part of him felt conflicted. The support was heartening, but it also underscored how far-reaching the situation had become. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was now a symbol for something larger. One evening, Eric called with a critical update. "We've secured internal documentation from the airline," he said. "It shows that Victoria has a history of filing complaints to receive free upgrades or discounts. There are at least 3 cases in the past 2 years where she made baseless accusations against airline staff or passengers." Alex felt a surge of vindication. That has to be enough to discredit her, right? "It's a big step," Eric said. "But the FBI still needs to close their investigation officially. The more evidence we present, the better our chances of clearing this up once and for all." That night, Alex sat on the back porch, staring out at the rain-soaked yard. Rachel joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him and sat down, her presence a quiet comfort. "You've been quiet," she said after a moment. Alex sighed, taking a sip of the tea. "I'm just tired, Rachel. Tired of feeling like I have to prove myself over and over again. I shouldn't have to fight this hard to show people who I really am." Rachel reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I know it's not fair, but the truth is coming to light, Alex. You've got people in your corner. Me, the kids, your lawyer, even strangers online. You're not alone in this." Alex nodded, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. He wasn't sure how long the battle would last, but one thing was certain. He wasn't giving up. The storm Victoria Blake had brought into his life wasn't over yet, but Alex was prepared to face it head-on. The next few weeks saw Alex's life under an unrelenting microscope. The investigation was still ongoing, but the story had spilled over into the public sphere. Local and national media outlets had picked up the narrative, often with misleading headlines that fanned the flames. "Veteran under investigation for in-flight incident. First-class clash. Military hero or aggressor?" For every supportive voice on social media, there was another doubting his innocence, feeding into the narrative Victoria Blake had spun. Alex avoided reading the comments when he could, but Rachel sometimes shared encouraging posts with him to lift his spirits. One particularly moving post came from a veteran who had served under Alex during a deployment in Afghanistan. "Sergeant Alex Carter is one of the best leaders I've ever had the honor to serve with. He never asked for respect. He earned it. To see his name dragged through the mud like this is an insult to every service member who puts their life on the line for this country." The post garnered thousands of likes and shares, and Alex couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude. It was a reminder that he wasn't alone, even when the walls seemed to be closing in. At the same time, Victoria Blake was facing growing scrutiny. Reports of her past false complaints had begun to circulate, thanks to the efforts of Alex's lawyer, Eric Langston, and a few investigative journalists. "Victoria Blake has a pattern," one article stated. "From false allegations against co-workers to unfounded complaints against service workers, she appears to weaponize accusations as a tool of manipulation." For the first time, the tide seemed to be turning. People who had initially taken her side began questioning her credibility. Despite the shift in public sentiment, the toll on Alex and his family was undeniable. At school, Noah overheard a classmate repeating something they had heard their parents say: "Your dad's in trouble because he yelled at a lady on a plane." Noah came home that afternoon with tears in his eyes. "Dad," he said, standing in the doorway of Alex's office, "did you really yell at someone on the plane?" Alex felt his chest tighten. He knelt down to Noah's level, his voice calm but firm. "No, buddy, I didn't. Sometimes people tell stories that aren't true, and that's what's happening here. But I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to make it right." Noah nodded slowly, but Alex could see the confusion in his son's eyes. It was moments like these that hurt the most, when his children had to carry a weight they didn't understand. Meanwhile, Eric continued building Alex's defense. He secured statements from several passengers who had been hesitant to speak initially, but were now willing to confirm that Victoria had been the one causing the disturbance. One of the most compelling witnesses was Linda Avery, who had been seated a few rows back. In her statement to the FBI, she described Victoria's behavior as combative and dismissive, and said Alex had remained calm throughout the interaction. She was the one making snide remarks, Linda said. He didn't raise his voice or do anything threatening. He was just trying to mind his own business. Eric also uncovered more evidence from the airline's internal files. Victoria had filed multiple complaints over the years, many of which were suspiciously similar to the one against Alex. In one instance, she accused a flight attendant of being unprofessional because they refused to upgrade her seat. "This is painting a clear picture," Eric told Alex during a meeting. "She's a serial accuser. And now that the truth is coming out, her credibility is falling apart." Despite the progress, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being stuck in limbo. The investigation dragged on, and the media frenzy refused to die down. One evening, Rachel found him sitting on the back porch, staring out at the darkened yard. She wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and sat beside him. "You're quiet again," she said gently. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It just feels like no matter what we do, this is never going to end. Even if I'm cleared, people will always remember the headlines. They won't care about the truth." Rachel placed a hand on his. "The people who matter will know. Your family, your friends, the ones who stand by you. They'll see the truth. That's what counts." He turned to her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "But what about the next time? What if this happens again? People like Victoria, they don't stop. They just find new ways to hurt people." Rachel's voice was steady, filled with quiet determination. "Then we keep fighting. We don't let people like her win." The fight was far from over, but cracks in Victoria's armor were becoming more visible. A turning point came when a former co-worker of hers, a man named Tom Grayson, stepped forward. "I used to work with Victoria at a marketing firm," Tom said during an interview. "She accused me of harassment after I got promoted over her. It was completely unfounded, but the damage was done. I had to leave the company because of the stress it caused." Tom's story echoed the experiences of others who had crossed paths with Victoria. As more people shared their encounters with her, a pattern of malicious behavior emerged. At a local veterans advocacy event, Alex was invited to speak about his experiences. Though hesitant at first, he decided to use the opportunity to shed light on the broader issue of false accusations and the challenges veterans faced in transitioning to civilian life. Standing at the podium, Alex looked out at the crowd, a mix of veterans, supporters, and community members. "This past month has been one of the hardest of my life," he began. "Not because of something I did, but because of something I didn't do. One person's lies threatened to take away everything I've worked for. But what I've learned is that when you stand for the truth, you don't stand alone." The audience erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks, Alex felt a sense of agency. He wasn't just reacting to what had happened. He was taking control of the narrative. As Alex stepped off the stage, a young man approached him. "Sergeant Carter," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm a veteran too. I just want to say thank you for speaking out. People like us, we don't always get the benefit of the doubt. But seeing you fight gives me hope." Alex shook the man's hand, gratitude swelling in his chest. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was part of something larger, a fight for justice, for truth, and for everyone who had ever been wrongfully silenced. The morning air was crisp, with golden sunlight breaking through the clouds. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. A text from Eric had come in early. "Call me as soon as you're up. We've got something big." Rachel poured a cup of coffee and placed it in front of him. "Eric?" she asked, reading his expression. "Yeah," Alex said, taking a sip. "He says there's news. I'll call him now." He dialed Eric's number, his pulse quickening as he waited for the lawyer to answer. "Alex," Eric said, his voice charged with energy. "We've got a game changer." A whistleblower from the airline just came forward with internal documentation. It confirms Victoria Blake has a long history of filing fraudulent complaints to manipulate situations for personal gain. Alex leaned forward, gripping his coffee mug tightly. What kind of documentation? Emails, reports, her entire pattern is laid out, Eric said. There's even a message where she explicitly stated she uses these complaints to get free upgrades or refunds. It's damning evidence. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt a surge of hope. This has to end it, right? Eric's tone remained cautious. It's a huge step in the right direction, but we're not done. We need to make sure the FBI sees this as part of their investigation. If they do, it'll completely dismantle her credibility. Later that day, Eric met with the FBI to present the whistleblower's evidence. Alex, meanwhile, stayed home, oscillating between hope and apprehension. Rachel found him in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball for their dog, Duke. You seem restless, she said, sitting on the porch steps. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's hard not to be. Every time we get a step closer to clearing this up, I feel like something else is waiting around the corner. Rachel gave him a reassuring smile. But this feels different, doesn't it? This time, we have proof. She can't talk her way out of this. Alex nodded, though the knot in his chest remained. I hope you're right. The following day, Alex received another call, this time from a passenger who had initially declined to get involved. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had been seated directly across from Victoria during the flight. I didn't want to speak up before, Maria admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I don't like getting involved in conflicts. But after seeing what's happening to you, I can't stay silent anymore. I saw everything, and you didn't do anything wrong. She was the one being rude and condescending. Alex thanked her, relief flooding his voice. Your statement could make all the difference. Are you willing to tell the investigators what you saw? Yes, Maria said firmly. I've already contacted them. I just want the truth to come out. Eric called later that afternoon with even more news. We've secured the full video from that passenger, Eric said. The one who recorded part of the exchange. It shows everything. The moment she confronted you, the way you stayed calm, and how she stormed off to another seat. It's crystal clear that she was the one causing the scene, not you. Alex sat down heavily, the weight of weeks of stress beginning to lift. So, what happens now? I've submitted the video to the FBI, Eric said. Between that, the whistleblower's evidence, and Maria's statement, the case is turning in our favor. The FBI should wrap this up soon. Despite the progress, Alex couldn't escape the lingering effects of the ordeal. At the grocery store, at Noah's soccer games, even walking the dog around the neighborhood, he felt the eyes of strangers on him. Some offered polite nods or words of encouragement, but others avoided his gaze, their judgment palpable. One evening, Rachel found Alex staring out the window, lost in thought. You okay? She asked, sitting beside him. He shrugged. I keep thinking about how easily this could have gone the other way. If we didn't have that video, if that whistleblower didn't step forward, I don't even want to think about it. Rachel placed a hand on his arm. But they did. The truth is on your side, Alex. You can't dwell on the what-ifs. Focus on what's real and what's ahead. He nodded, though her words didn't entirely chase away his unease. A week later, Alex received the call he'd been waiting for. Sergeant Carter, Agent Miller said, his tone professional but warm. The investigation is officially closed. Based on the evidence we've reviewed, it's clear the allegations against you were baseless. The whistleblower's testimony and the video footage were decisive. Alex closed his eyes, the tension draining from his body. Thank you, he said quietly. There's more, Miller continued. We're forwarding the evidence regarding Ms. Blake's history of fraudulent complaints to the district attorney's office. She may face charges for filing a false report and harassment. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt like he could truly breathe. That evening, Alex and Rachel sat on the couch, the kids playing with Duke at their feet. The house felt lighter, as though the storm clouds had finally parted. It's over, Alex said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Rachel smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. I never doubted it would be. The truth always comes out, Alex. Sometimes it just takes longer than it should. Alex nodded, his thoughts drifting to the countless people who didn't have the same support system, the same resources to fight back against lies and injustice. "I want to do something," he said suddenly, "for the people who don't have a voice, the ones who don't have lawyers like Eric or families like ours. I can't just let this go." Rachel squeezed his hand. "Then don't. Use this to make a difference." The next morning, Alex contacted a local veterans advocacy group. He shared his story, not for sympathy, but to highlight the challenges many faced when navigating false accusations and public judgment. Within days, he was invited to speak at a community event. Standing in front of a small crowd, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks," he said, "about truth, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what's right. But I've also learned that none of us can do it alone. When we support each other, when we fight for each other, we can overcome even the toughest battles." The crisp morning air was filled with a sense of renewal as Alex walked into the local courthouse. It wasn't for his case. His part of the ordeal was over. This time, the focus was squarely on Victoria Blake. Following the FBI's conclusion, her long history of manipulative behavior had come under intense scrutiny. The district attorney had decided to press charges for filing a false report and harassment, and Alex had been called as a witness. Dressed in a navy blazer and pressed slacks, Alex felt a mix of emotions. Relief that his name had been cleared, but also a lingering sense of unease. He had no interest in seeing Victoria suffer. He just wanted accountability. Rachel walked beside him, her presence a constant source of strength. "You okay?" she asked, glancing at his stoic expression. "I will be," Alex said. "This feels like the final step." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but orderly. Victoria sat at the defense table, her usual air of confidence diminished. Her high-powered lawyer whispered to her, but she barely reacted, her face pale and drawn. The prosecutor began by laying out Victoria's pattern of behavior, presenting a timeline of complaints she had filed against various individuals over the years. Witnesses testified about how her false accusations had disrupted their lives, from a flight attendant who lost a promotion to a former coworker who had left his job to avoid the stress of a drawn-out legal battle. Alex's turn came, and as he took the stand, he felt every eye in the room on him. "Sergeant Carter," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of the flight that led to this case?" Alex recounted the encounter with Victoria in detail, his voice steady and clear. He spoke about how she had confronted him, her condescending remarks, and the moment she escalated the situation by filing her complaint. "Did you at any point raise your voice, threaten her, or use inappropriate language?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Alex said firmly. "I stayed calm the entire time. I was just trying to get home to my family." The prosecutor nodded and turned to the jury. "Sergeant Carter is not just a decorated soldier. He is a father, a husband, and a man who has dedicated his life to serving others. This baseless accusation was an attempt to tarnish his reputation and undermine his integrity. The evidence speaks for itself." When Victoria's lawyer cross-examined Alex, he attempted to poke holes in his testimony, suggesting that Alex might have misinterpreted her remarks or acted defensively. "Sergeant Carter," the lawyer said, "is it possible that Ms. Blake's comments were taken out of context?" Alex met the lawyer's gaze without hesitation. "I didn't misunderstand her. She made it clear she didn't think I belonged in first class. And when I didn't respond the way she wanted, she decided to escalate." The lawyer shifted in his seat, sensing he wasn't gaining ground. The trial continued for several days, with the prosecution presenting damning evidence, including the whistleblower's testimony and the incriminating emails. Maria Santos, the passenger who had stepped forward, delivered a powerful statement about what she had witnessed, describing Victoria's behavior as hostile and entitled. By the end of the trial, the jury had heard more than enough. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. As the judge handed down her sentence, Victoria sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was ordered to pay fines, serve community service, and attend counseling for anger management and conflict resolution. For Alex, it wasn't about the punishment, it was about the message. People like Victoria could no longer act without consequences. Outside the courthouse, A small group of supporters greeted Alex with cheers and handshakes. Fellow veterans, community members, and even strangers who had followed the case came to thank him for standing his ground. One man approached Alex, his eyes filled with emotion. "I've been through something similar," he said. "False accusations almost ruined my career. Watching you fight back gave me hope." Alex shook his hand, humbled by the man's words. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." That evening, Alex and Rachel sat on the back porch, the sounds of crickets filling the air. The kids were inside, laughing as they played a board game, and Duke lay at Alex's feet, his tail wagging lazily. "It's over," Alex said, his voice filled with quiet relief. Rachel nodded, her hand resting on his. "You did it, Alex. You stood up for yourself, and for everyone who's ever been in your shoes." Alex leaned back, staring up at the stars. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Eric, or the people who believed in me." Rachel smiled. "Now it's time to focus on what's next." "What's next?" Alex repeated, the words settling in his mind. He had been given a second chance, not just to rebuild his life, but to use his experience to help others. In the weeks that followed, Alex became an advocate for justice and accountability. He joined forces with veterans organizations and legal aid groups, working to ensure that no one else would have to endure what he had. He spoke at community events, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. His name, once associated with controversy, became a symbol of resilience and truth. One afternoon, as Alex sat in the backyard watching Noah and Emily play, Rachel brought out a stack of letters. "These came in the mail," she said, handing them to him. Alex opened the first envelope and found a handwritten note from a woman in Texas. "Your story inspired me to speak up about something I've been afraid to share for years. Thank you for your courage." The next letter was from a young man who had recently left the military. "Thank you for showing the world what true leadership looks like. Your strength gives the rest of us hope." Alex read each letter carefully, his heart swelling with gratitude. Rachel sat beside him, her voice soft. "You've made a difference, Alex. More than you realize." He looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "It's just the beginning." A crisp breeze swept through the park as Alex sat on a bench, watching Noah and Emily race across the playground. Their laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the distant chatter of other families. Rachel was a few steps away, chatting with a neighbor while holding Duke's leash. It was a peaceful scene, one that Alex had dreamed of during his long deployment and the tumultuous weeks that followed his ordeal with Victoria Blake. Now, with the court case behind him, Alex felt a sense of closure. The storm that had consumed his life for months had finally passed, leaving him with hard-earned clarity and a renewed sense of purpose. The weeks following Victoria's conviction had been transformative. Alex had thrown himself into advocacy work, collaborating with veterans organizations to support those struggling with issues of reintegration and justice. One of his proudest achievements was helping to launch a program called Shield of Truth, aimed at providing legal and emotional support to veterans facing false accusations or systemic discrimination. The initiative quickly gained traction, with law firms, community leaders, and fellow veterans rallying behind the cause. At the program's first meeting, Alex stood before a crowd of about 50 people, a mix of veterans, legal professionals, and community advocates. "False accusations can break a person," Alex said, his voice steady but impassioned. "But when we stand together, when we speak up, we can protect each other and make sure no one has to face this alone." The room erupted into applause, and Alex felt a swell of pride. Not for himself, but for the strength of the community coming together to fight for justice. At home, life was slowly returning to normal. The media had moved on to other stories, and Alex's name was no longer the center of public attention. Yet, he couldn't ignore the lingering lessons from his experience. One evening, as he and Rachel sat on the couch, he shared a thought that had been weighing on him. "You know," he began, staring at the ceiling, "I keep thinking about how many people don't have the resources or support to fight back when they're wronged." Rachel nodded, her hand resting on his. "That's why what you're doing with Shield of Truth is so important. You're giving people a voice." Alex turned to her, his expression serious. "It's not just about veterans, though. This is bigger than me. bigger than us. There's so much work to be done, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. Rachel smiled, her voice gentle but firm. You don't have to fix the whole world, Alex. Just focus on what you can do, one step at a time. Her words resonated deeply. Alex had always been a man of action, but now he understood the power of patience and persistence. A month later, Alex was invited to speak at a national veterans conference in Washington, D.C. The event brought together leaders, advocates, and veterans from across the country, all dedicated to addressing the challenges faced by those who served. Standing on the stage, Alex felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination. He glanced at Rachel, seated in the front row with Noah and Emily, their faces beaming with pride. "My name is Alex Carter," he began, his voice steady. "I'm a father, a husband, a veteran, and, until recently, a man who found himself caught in a web of lies that nearly destroyed my life." He paused, letting the words settle over the audience. "I share my story not for sympathy, but to shine a light on a problem that too many of us face. False accusations, prejudice, and systemic biases are not just personal challenges. They're societal issues that demand our attention.